preface this video, I want to make it clear that this is not the way to manual swap an Infiniti M30. This is just the way I manual swapped my M30. If you go online, there's a bunch of different people that will tell you a bunch of different ways to do it, and it can get a little confusing and conflicting. I'm also not claiming that this is the best way to do it. This is just how I did it, and it worked well for me, and I got a nice OEM looking result. In the description, I'll list all the parts I use, as long as link the M30 factory service manual so you can reference that for the things like the wiring diagrams, and I'm gonna do as best as I can to help give you as much information that you will need to do your own swap. All right, so we'll start with the most important part, which is going to be the transmission itself. I used an RS530A, which is the manual transmission out of a Z32 300ZX. Now, the automatic in the M30 is the same automatic that was put in the Z32s. So this is kind of like the manual transmission counterpart. The bell housing will bolt right up to the M30's VG30, and the trans cross member from the M30's automatic will bolt straight to the 30A, which allows the transmission to simply just be bolted in place. The starter will also just bolt right in, so you don't really have any problems with any of those systems. Now, I use the trans out of a naturally aspirated 300ZX. Now, the twin turbos have the same trans, but the bell housing is slightly different. It'll still bolt up, but the starter sits like 10 millimeters farther out, so I believe you have a problem with starter engagement there. I cannot speak on that, but personally, I use an NA trans, and it bolted all up right just fine. So when you get a transmission, take your automatic out, take your drive shaft out, and then also take your interior, like the center console and the automatic shifter assembly out so that you can get the shifter coming up through the floor. Now, before you put the transmission in, you're gonna need a flywheel and some clutch components, specifically a flywheel out of an 88 to 94 Nissan Maxima. The thing is, you need the Maxima flywheel out of a single cam Maxima, not the twin cam. The VG30E, which is the engine in the M30, and the Maxima has a single cam, and it has a 6-bolt flywheel. The other engine offered in that same generation of Maxima was the twin cam engine, which had a VG30DE, which has an 8-bolt flywheel. So there is a difference there, and you need to make sure that you're getting a flywheel for an 88 to 94 VG30E Maxima. Now, unfortunately, stock replacement flywheels are not available for the Maxima anymore. So you're going to have to find one from a junkyard or like a part out and then have it resurfaced if you want to go that route. Since those cars are not super common, especially anymore, these are really hard to come by, and although this is a good option, it can be hard to do. Now, there's also an aftermarket flywheel on the market, only one, and that is a performance option from Fidanza. It's kind of a lighter weight flywheel, and it's definitely expensive. So I found my RPMs dropping pretty fast between shifts, and it just, I don't know, it kind of is a little bit too race car for the M30's luxury personality, but like I said, it's kind of the only option, so you don't have many choices to choose from. So personally, if you can get your hands on an OEM style flywheel for an 88 to 94 Maxima, I'd recommend that. But I went with the route with Fidanza, and it's okay. It's just expensive and not really ideal. Also, don't forget to pick up some flywheel bolts. The flex plate bolts are too short and they will not work. They will work, but they're too short, and that's not good, so don't do that. You're going to need some M10 by 1-25 millimeter bolts for that. Next, you will need a Z31 clutch kit, specifically the clutch, the pressure plate, and the pilot bushing. These are all drop-in. These will all function and work as intended, and you won't have to modify them in any way. Since you have a Z32 trans, you will then need a Z32 throwout bearing, and that will make all of that mesh together. Make sure you get some pressure plate bolts as well to bolt the pressure plate to the flywheel. The pressure plate bolts are M8 by 1.5-15 millimeter. You may also want to source the Z32's engine to transmission brackets and the lower dust cover for the Z32. When you take this all out, you'll notice that there's these brackets that bolt to the engine and then bolt to the transmission on the M30. These will not be in the correct position for bolting the Z32 transmission up. So to do this the correct way, you're going to want to source those as well. That being said, lots of people seem to go without these and just run it without the lower 4 bolts, me included, and I have not had any problems. So although that is the correct way to do it, it seems like you can kind of get away without it. Depending on your application, you might want to consider this if you're doing a little bit more of a performance build. But for me, just having a cruiser, I haven't seemed to have any problems with this. So now that your transmission is in, you're going to need a drive shaft. The M30's factory drive shaft will not work with the 30A. So you'll need to have a drive shaft shop make you a one-piece drive shaft that matches the 30A's slip yoke and the M30's differential. So talk to a drive shaft shop and they will tell you how to make that measurement and they can have you get one built. So once you get the transmission in, you'll have your shifter coming up through the hole in the trans tunnel. And you'll notice that it doesn't sit center. If you put your center console back in, you'll notice that the shifter just sits kind of up and to the left. Now, this is kind of far forward to be comfortable, and it just looks bad because it doesn't sit center. To correct this, you can use a two-piece short shifter assembly and then make a little bit of an offset plate to center it. So use this two-piece short shifter and then unscrew it in half, put a lock nut on the bottom half through the offset plate, and then send a bolt up with a lock washer to the shifter, and it will sit in the hole of the automatic bezel center, and it will look nice and be in a good spot for actually driving. Now you will have to trim this bezel back a little bit to make this fit. However, you're going to want to cover this with a shift boot anyway, so it's really no big deal. Now the M30 shared dashboard styling with an R31 Skyline. So the R31 shift bezel is a direct fit into the M30 center console. So you can find a manual shift bezel for R31 and put it in your M30 and have a really OEM looking shift boot. Though obviously these are going to be hard to source and expensive when you find them, so keep that in mind if that's something you want to do. Moving on to the hydraulic side of things. You're going to need a Z31 clutch pedal. Now Nissan designed this automatic shift lock box that's in all of the automatic cars from this area to bolt into where a clutch pedal goes. Since there's no clutch pedal on the automatic, but the holes are already there, it just bolts in. Now, even though the M30 has no manual option, this still has this box there, and it still has the mounting holes for a clutch pedal. So, conveniently enough, a Z31 clutch pedal will just bolt in. Now, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just bolting the pedal in. This is the only part of the whole swap that you really need to do much fabrication, but the Z31 clutch pedal will just hang too low, and you're going to have to reposition it by cutting the clutch pedal in half and then kind of welding it at a better angle and a better height to match the brake pedal. Now, if you don't have access to a welder, you could just do this by drilling holes through the pedal and nut and bolting it at the angle you need, and that should work just as fine too, as long as you secure it nice and good. Because the clutch pedal is only bolted to the firewall, you're going to have a lot of flex. So you're going to need to reinforce it some other way. I just welded a brace between the clutch and brake pedal assemblies, and that reinforced it enough so that my clutch pedal was just firm and didn't have any play in it. I actually just used a chunk of the clutch pedal that I cut off and welded it between the two assemblies, and that worked good for me. As for the brake pedal, since I already had a Z31 manual brake pedal, I just cut off the M30's fat auto brake pedal and welded on the Z31 manual brake pedal in the same position. And since the pedal covers on the Z31 match the same pedal covers on the M30, this will result with a very OEM looking pedal set, and I was pretty satisfied with the results. You could also take the pedal cover for a manual brake pedal and use it as a stencil to cut down your auto brake pedal and then cover it with the manual brake pedal cover, and you will also get a manual sized brake pedal. But you'll have less adjustment with this option, even though it will be, I guess, a little bit easier. Now, since you have a Z31 clutch pedal, you're gonna need a Z31 master cylinder. So just source a Z31 master cylinder. And then since you now have a Z32 transmission, you're going to want a Z32 slave cylinder. Those will both obviously just bolt right in. And then I used a Z32 flexible hydraulic line that I got off eBay to just tie the two together. You could run like hard lines or something, but this was cheap and easy. And I just reused the Adel clamps that held the transcooler lines in place to run the clutch hydraulic line across the firewall and down by the slave cylinder. So this made it pretty easy to install, and I think it looked nice enough for what I was trying to do. Okay, last but not least, you're going to have to change some of the wiring and do some basic wiring modification to make the manual transmission cooperate with the M30. Down below, I have linked the factory service manual that you can use to look at the wiring diagrams and reference those for making these changes. So if you put the neutral safety switch, which is the lever that's on the automatic trans linkage, because the car thinks it is in park or neutral, the car will start. But you're going to want to remove this, so this is how you're going to make it start. You have two options. Now you can simply just loop the neutral safety switch wires around and spoof the car into thinking that it's always in park or neutral. You can do this up by the connector at the battery and just solder the two wires together and you'll be done. Now a more correct way to do this is if your clutch pedal has a clutch safety switch, you can wire the neutral safety switch wires to the clutch pedal, and that way the car will only start with the clutch pedal depressed. Now I guess early Z31s did not have a clutch safety switch and my pedal set did not, so although this is something I wanted to do, I didn't have the switch there to do it, so I just looped mine over for now. But the more correct way to do this would be to source some sort of clutch pedal position switch and wire the neutral safety switch to that, and that will give you a little bit more of an OEM operating and a safer function. So once you do that, you can remove that neutral safety switch from underneath by the transmission. Because the automatic neutral safety switch is what operated the reverse lights, you're going to now need to route those to the backup light switch on the manual transmission. And that will allow your backup lights to still function when you put the transmission in reverse. If you have a 1990 M30, then you have a cable-driven speedometer, and well, you're gonna have a problem there because the 300ZX has a electronic vehicle speed sensor. If you have a 91 or 92 M30, then you also have a electronic vehicle speed sensor. But the problem is it will not bolt into the 38. To get this to work, you simply just wire in a 300ZX speed sensor and it will make your speedometer read. The problem is it will not read correctly because the gearing of those two cars are totally different. There's only one correct way to fix this, and it's get some sick JDM 14-inch wheels. Now once your speedometer is working, your cruise control will also work as well. The thing is, you don't have a clutch cancel switch because the car didn't have a clutch pedal to begin with. So you're going to want to wire the clutch cancel switch on the clutch pedal in series with the cancel switch on the brake pedal. That way, if you have the cruise control on and you clutch in without canceling it first, it'll cancel it for you. If you don't do this, the car will kind of rev erratically and have a freak out. That's pretty easy to do, so I recommend doing that. Now, I know that was a lot of information, and I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting because I did this a few months ago, but feel free to comment or message me on Instagram, and I will gladly help you as much as I can. Personally, I didn't feel like this was a very complicated swap to do. It just was kind of hard finding information and finding a path on how to do it. So I want to do my best to help people just get the swap done on their car. And like I said, there's other ways to do the swaps with other transmissions. Some people use a Z31 transmission. There's different Z31 transmissions they use and different components. So do your research, look into what works best for you and what works best with what you're trying to do. Some old information can be found on F31 Club, the old forum for M30s and Nissan Leopards. There's also the M30 and Nissan Leopard owners group on Facebook, which is a more current source of information for doing stuff like this. Other than that, I think the manual definitely makes these cars a lot more fun to drive. Being a sporty style coupe, it just kind of makes sense that they have a manual transmission. And it seems like all the cars at this point have transmission problems, so it's kind of just the best way to get rid of your automatic problems is just get rid of your automatic. So I really recommend putting a manual in these cars. I didn't really like the car without it, but now that it has it, I really enjoy the car, and I actually daily mine, and I think it's a great, fun, but comfortable daily. So I can't recommend the swap enough, and thanks for watching, and well, good luck.